Good afternoon. Welcome to the post-lunch session. So, um, so I've been in the shit sector for about 5-6 years now, maybe a little more than that. And we are so rude. We talk about our work at lunch and dinner also. And so in the family situation, this can lead to a lot of issues. But here, lunch, post-lunch, everything. So that's what I enjoy about being in like-minded company. So welcome to this session. Subsidiarity for service delivery, and we are going to look into the mechanics of sanitation. So I am actually very happy for the work that Neha has done and her team, and I'm sure you will thoroughly enjoy this presentation. It's one of the few studies which, in the Indian context, has explored, has actually looked at on-site sanitation systems, typology of on-site sanitation systems. Um, I think we have looked at about with thousands of these OSS, but in terms of documenting, in terms of looking at them in a scientific way, this is probably one of the few studies. So I would invite Neha to come and show her work, and then we have a very distinguished panel of eminent speakers to discuss what are the mechanics of sanitation after Neha is.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Shashanka, for the wonderful introduction of the study. So, on-site sanitation systems, what are they and what do they do and how prevalent are they and why should we study them? In bigger cities and the metropolitans like Delhi, for instance, households rely on sewerage systems for managing wastewater, right? So this is black water as well as grey water. What do we mean by black water and grey water for those who are yet uninitiated? Black water is wastewater from the toilets, right? It's highly pathogenic in nature, and grey water emanates from is a result of household activities like bathing, cooking, etc. And though not as pernicious in terms of microbiological quality or lack thereof, grey water presents its own challenges as we saw earlier in the day. Now, in smaller cities, there's a huge reliance on what we call on-site sanitation systems. Given the resource intensiveness of sewerage centralized systems, not only to build but also to operate, the smaller cities have not really had the opportunity to upgrade to these centralized sewer systems, right? And in urban India especially, we see that 62% of the urban households are connected to these on-site sanitation systems. These systems are septic tanks, leaching pits, and over the last 5 years, we've heard a lot about them as SBM has sought to increase toilet coverage. And there was a discourse on what type of on-site sanitation system should be built, and twin leaching pits was put forth as one of the solutions. So as per Census 2011, and of course the numbers have increased, 28 million households relied on these systems. Compared to the centralized systems, we see that they have very, very low visibility. Ultimately, the household is responsible for not only the construction, but also its upkeep. And this means that the city really never intervenes, right? So in terms of innovation too, it's all contingent on that context, and there's never been a strong push to really innovate in system design. Of course, we've seen the last few years, Professor Mutnuri is also going to talk about this during the panel, like what type of new systems are emerging. In terms of planning too, there is very little focus on these systems, right? So despite their critical mandate to safely manage black water, there's very limited institutional oversight on these systems. And in terms of the treatment level that we expect from these systems, it's ultimately the same that you would expect from a sewage treatment plant. It is about managing this wastewater safely in a way that it is safe to release into the environment or to be reused. But despite their similar scope and the number of people that they serve in urban India, the stakeholder expectation is very, very low from these systems. Oftentimes it's said that these systems are a stopgap arrangement, but as we've seen, even now in countries as developed as USA, 20% of the population still relies on these systems. And India especially, we've treated these systems as a transitory phenomena for too long. In the context especially of water stress and water quality, it becomes important to study these systems and recognize what their needs are. Are they really doing the job of imparting safe sanitation or not? So what does a typical system look like? When we say septic tank system, we essentially mean a septic tank, which is where the primary treatment happens, and then we have a soil-based system like a soak pit, for instance, or dispersion trench, which treats the effluent through its disposal into the subsurface. This is the system, and like, of course, downstream to their further requirements, like off-site treatment facilities. There's been a lot of talk of co-treatment also recently, but that is not part of the present study. Our study is solely going to focus on the household level infrastructure. So the first codes for these systems came out in the 1980s when the Bureau of International Standards put out one for septic tank systems and another for leaching pits in rural and urban areas. And there are a lot of parameters that guide the performance of these systems, right? And some of these are absolute requirements, but others can be trade-offs, right? So for example, you have to manage the effluent that comes out of these septic tanks properly and safely, right? So that is uncompromisable. But whether it's a septic tank that's 2,000 liters large or 20,000 liters large, that is a pure trade-off. So how did we go about studying these systems? We conducted a sample survey of 3,000 households in 4 Indian states. Along with interviewing these households, we also spoke to a lot of key stakeholders such as masons, engineers, public health officers. So we surveyed Uttarakhand, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Orissa with different hydrogeological characteristics. Now, what do we find? We find that on the ground, most of these systems are in fact septic tanks, right? Pits comprise only 9% of the total mix of sanitation technologies, and these two have largely come up under the subsidy-led constructions. So if you look at those toilets which were constructed by the households on their own, of their own accord, the number of these systems is about 8%, but increases almost 3 times in prevalence when the households constructed the toilet using government subsidy. Especially with respect to twin pits, right? Even if they've increased in the number at large, so we see about 11% of all scheme-led toilets or subsidy-led toilets were twin pits. You see there's still a very, very large proportion of septic tanks that need to be dealt with. Which brings us to the question, how do we tackle this big problem? Well, we start with understanding what the problem is and defining it a little bit better. Now, you would expect a fairly standardized system for a given household size, right? But that doesn't happen. We see that along each of the major parameters that are enlisted by the technical codes, there is vast variation, right? And especially in dense urban settings, as households try to maximize the space that they can use within a plot, they often tend to build their septic tanks directly underneath a toilet or a building. So they'll have one and not in the backyard, they'll have it right underneath the house, to the point that sometimes when you ask people to point out where the septic tank is, they might as well point at a differently colored tile in the drawing room floor. Another thing that we noticed is that most of these systems dominantly manage black water, right? Given that black water only comprises about 20 to 25% of the toilet wastewater, moving to a paradigm of more recycling. Moving to a paradigm which is more recycling led, right? We need to also figure out what is happening to this grey water, because it's for sure not going into the OSS system in most of these instances. So Wienerberger remarked in 1984 that modern septic tank design has evolved mostly as a function of construction convenience, low cost, and repetitive practice. And this couldn't hold more true even in the current context. And I'll come to this later, but household level factors are the ones that influence the system design most strongly, right? They're largely non-compliant. So we saw that only 2% of these systems actually complied with all of the major requirements of the IS code. In terms of sizes, like I mentioned, there's a huge trade-off. And because for households, the priority is to build a system and then forget about it, they build very, very large systems, as large as possible. So we see 11,000 liters is kind of the average volume that has been reported across the board. And this can be, say, if you want to visualize it, something like an 8 feet by 8 feet by 6 feet or 8 feet chamber almost. We see that household size has negligible bearing on the size of these systems, contrary to what the standard sets out. And in fact, the economic status of the house, the plot size of the house, has a much stronger impact on what type of system is built and also how big these systems are. That is, and I talk about size because size is an important parameter to the household because it determines how frequently they have to interact with the system, but also in terms of FSTP designing, right, and the kind of treatment capacities that you need in a city. So what we did was we created a framework based on these key requirements of technical codes and tried to see how many of the septic tanks complied with the standards and how many of them were safe. As I pointed out earlier, less than 2% of these were actually compliant, and in fact, almost 90% of them need some sort of intervention to perform better. The case was similar with twin pits, although they did a little bit better. These are largely single pits. So if you study a single pit in isolation, it tends to do well, but we need to remember that it also has its own downstream requirements that can be avoided in a twin pit system, at least in certain rural, peri-urban settings. So in terms of the distinct needs that we need to address to have these systems function fully, recognizing again that millions of households depend on these systems across the country, and in the context of water pollution, it is an immediate and pressing need. Septic tanks need to be more efficient at the household level, right? And this does two things. Of course, you're able to treat much more and control at that point and intervene at that point, but also B, that reduces your downstream requirements, where ULBs can get away with doing a little less in terms of the treatment type that you are adopting. Second, we need to focus on the management of effluent from these tanks. We see that a lot of them, in fact, 60% of them directly discharge effluent into open drains, right? And if you take the total number, it's 72% going straight up into drains as opposed to going into a soak pit. But whether or not soak pits are appropriate in this urban settings is still a question that needs to be asked. Right. The third thing that we need to ensure is that these systems perform consistently over time. In terms of like what we need to do for leaching pits, we need to make sure that they have, for in high-risk zones such as high water table areas or areas with clayey soil where the percolation may not be as high, we need to have more adaptability from these systems, which might mean either retrofitting them based on already prescribed mitigatory criteria or convert these systems into some sort of watertight systems. With respect to pits, we interestingly noticed that of all of the pits that had been reported as emptied in its lifetime in our survey, nearly 40 to 45% had been cleaned manually. That percentage is much smaller for septic tank systems. Now, this could be due to various reasons. It could be accessibility issues. It could be the issue of costing. It could also be the issue of the actual consistency of the materials inside a pit that need to be pumped out. So I'm going to begin summarizing what we've discussed so far and like how to chart a way ahead, right? These systems have different objectives for different stakeholders based on whose lens you apply. As a household, I want minimal engagement from the system. I do not want to empty it very frequently. On the regulator side, you want it to have decent enough treatment and you want to safeguard public and environmental health, right? Now, on the household side, they are taking actions to fulfill their own priorities by constructing septic tanks, by constructing large septic tanks, by connecting them to the drain, right? And by interconnecting twin pits. Whereas, given the regulator priorities, we have not seen a lot of action from the regulators. So how do we bring these two set of stakeholders together? And the third is, of course, private sector participation. There's tremendous scope for the private sector to innovate in this particular sector. So of the recommendations that we spoke of, more efficient household level treatment, right? Is there a way that we can possibly standardize these systems through prefabrication? That is a question that we need to ask ourselves. We already see that on websites like IndiaMart and others, you have informal degree of prefabrication happening, like the Balram tanks in Madhya Pradesh as well. Right? But they're still not regulated, they do not have a standard per se to comply with, as opposed to highly evolved markets for these systems, say in Malaysia, in Japan, to the point of actual products which are able to monitor these products, monitor the quality of these, the effluent from these systems better in countries like United States, right? So we need to see some degree of product evolution. In terms of OSS innovation, there's still a lot that we can do in terms of pure system design, right? So maybe we can have an upflow type of reactor. I have not read the room well, so I'm not sure if the message is getting through, but the idea really is to introduce more innovation in the system design itself and combine it with prefab to have consistent quality and ease regulatory woes. The second thing that we need to do is to understand that it doesn't end with the household level system, that you need to look at the system with all of its downstream requirements and then adjudge what is the basis, what basis should be adopted for selecting these systems in a given city or in a given region. And this is where I thought the Rai's comments from earlier in the day were very, very useful, when they had like multiple levels of governance, starting from the local levels, right, and then up to the regional level, where you can really plan and innovate and plan for those regional specificities, while at the ULB level you are implementing and making sure that implementation is efficient. So how do we go forward? We have seen that a lot of cities are constructing these fecal sludge treatment plants, right? But that doesn't change anything for the effluent, right? Because the effluent is still going into the drains all year round. It might be a bit better if you are timely emptying or desludging on a regular period, but the pathogenic content still remains, because septic tanks do not treat pathogens. So all of your E. coli, all of your helminth, all of the other microbiological contaminants are still going to be there in that effluent, right? So nothing is done for that in the current situation, and neither for grey water. Septic tanks connected to soak pits may be a good idea for rural areas, possibly, depending on the hydrogeology, and this is something that the rural sanitation strategy has also been proposing as part of their retrofits. But in urban areas, it might not be as easy as we think, and not just because there are capital constraints or because there are space constraints, in terms of how many soak pits can you really build in a given piece of land without compromising the soil's ability to actually treat that effluent that's going into the ground, is something that we need to question. Can we have small bore type systems or something like a twin drain system that is able to convey these effluent to a decentralized facility along with grey water, and where we can manage it? Is that something that is possible? Is also, we need to think about what type of cities are we looking at, right? So cities that are still small and for which the population growth is going to be fairly controllable or not make sewerage systems feasible even in the long run, maybe there we can think about these ideas. And of course, we're seeing that a lot of cities are moving towards providing sewerage networks under like the Amrut program. So here, an interesting thing that we noticed was that septic tank outlets are being directly connected to the septic tank. The sewer line is connected to the septic tank outlet. So what do we need here? We need to account for this sort of behavior while planning our sewerage systems, right? Because maybe that reduces the amount of energy and materials that we invest into these systems, because then we can get away with doing maybe small bore type systems instead of conventional sewerage, or we engage in changing the behavior of households to make sure that the septic tanks are decommissioned before connecting the household to the sewer line. So in the short term, at least, it seems that soak pits are not going to be feasible as much as other solutions, which are albeit a bit more costly. But these decisions will have to be taken at a very, very local level. In terms of managing effluent quality, the recent ODF++ protocol amendment said that now every ULB has to put out this bylaw where you are emptying a tank in every 3 years. Do we really need that, is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Given that household characteristics would result, and not just the household, but the household and the on-site sanitation system characteristics would result in a very, very different time of timely emptying requirement. Do we want to incur all of that avoidable financial and environmental burden? A different CPR study shows that transportation costs, in fact, are one of the highest costs when it comes to the conveyance of sludge from these systems to treatment plants. And that, of course, has its own repercussions of on carbon emissions, right? So this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. We see here is a framework which shows that if the average reported size of 11,000 liters, right, for a family of 6 means that they're not required to empty their system based on the scientific basis, also it codified in the IS standards, before 8 years. Ultimately, this planning exercise and this exercise for improving on-site sanitation systems would have to be underpinned by novel tools and novel strategies for planning and for data. So for data, we know that there are these systems that are being piloted to non-intrusively get specifics of an on-site sanitation system called the VOLAZO. In terms of planning, we see a sanitation planning tool that was developed for the city of Dar es Salaam, where they were able to overlay layers of socioeconomic characteristics, settlement types, types of on-site sanitation systems, water tables, to see where is the most critical overlap happening and where do you need to prioritize. And needless to say that one of the reasons why we are at this juncture is because of the limited capacities of the regulators on the ground to regulate these systems. So all of this effort will have to be ultimately bolstered by the capacities of ULPs and other regulating bodies. In conclusion, the discussion on the sanitation service chain is not complete without discussing on-site sanitation systems, given especially that they do not meet their required objectives. The tinkering with existing systems can be a challenge, given how these are built in urban settings, but they still require a very, very close look. So for upgradation of these systems in the future and for newer systems, prefabrication might have the potential to ease regulatory woes and facilitate compliance. But for this, we really do need the government to have a programmatic focus and dedicated emphasis on innovation. In the short term and on a local level and at a ULP level, effluent and grey water management should be a priority. Timely emptying does help the situation a little bit, but it does not eradicate the problem. Concern really remains for what is the best way to implement it given the specifics of the city. I would like to end on this note and just leave you all with a lot more questions than hopefully you started out with. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha. As I said, it's one of the few studies out there that looks at OSS in a comprehensive way. Also the sample size and the sort of spread of the samples. Although it is middle India, I think a lot of lessons hold for the south also, other than the mountainous regions. So in terms of spread, in terms of the scale of the study, thanks for doing this and sharing with us. I think there's more that we need to pick up from this study and pursue further. For example, the scheduled desludging intervals is one story which we can probably explore further and see how it might help us going forward with fecal sludge management. But like you said, there are more questions than perhaps answers. And now I think is a good time to invite my colleagues and fellow panelists. I would like to start with Professor Tare. Could you please join us, sir? Professor Tare is from IIT Kanpur. In most such sessions, he doesn't need any introduction. He has been, since I've been in the sector, he's one of the names that I've been hearing again and again as a guiding light to governments, to several departments in terms of how standards are to be set. And I had the fortune of having a scintillating discussion with him in Chennai the day before yesterday on the philosophy of environmental management. You guys missed it. So welcome, sir, and thank you for being here. Next, I would invite Mr. Dorai Narayan, independent consultant in WASH from Malaysia. Dorai sir has seen the evolution of a toilet from a bucket toilet all the way to 80% sewage in Malaysia, and I've always enjoyed his narration of how Malaysia went through that evolution. So, thank you, sir, for joining us. And my distinct pleasure to invite Professor Srikant Mutnuri from the PITS Goa campus. He is not just an academician, he is also an innovator. I've been reading about his fecal sludge treatment plant, and now today we will also hear about his on-site treatment system innovations. So thanks for being here, sir. And Neha, could you also please come up and join us? So, you know, I've already said that I really like the study, but I think my job is also to play the devil's advocate. So I'll step back and I will say we declared ourselves ODF. We built all the toilets that we really wanted to build. And, you know, when building the toilets, I don't think we ever stopped and looked at what we are trying to build. So, Professor Tare, why did we do such studies? Why are we still going and doing these kinds of studies? The ship has sailed and we are still checking the tide levels.
Well, I mean, studies are of course required because you need to keep on finding out what you did, whether it is working or not working or whatever. See, the problem essentially comes because we always have less resources than what is actually required for a perfect solution, right? And when we don't implement a perfect solution, obviously there will be issues. And so we need to keep on finding it out. But I guess what we should be looking at is whatever investment that we make, are we getting value for the money? We want to solve a particular problem, and to solve that problem, we are investing. And are we really solving the problem, or we are multiplying the problem? That is something that we need to look at, isn't it? So, open defecation, yes, we certainly want to get rid of it. But the most important thing is when you construct a toilet, what happens to what you drop? Where does it go? Right? And there is no magic that it can just vanish. Okay? And then, of course, we have various kinds of system. In some systems, it stays for much longer. In some systems, it stays for a shorter time. If it gets completely degraded, then obviously it gets degraded. Then we have to invest in that faster process of degradation. Obviously, invariably, and that's the blame that we give to STPs, right? Because in STPs that happens in a faster way, but then a lot of investment and the things are required. So we obviously don't want to spend that much money. So we would like to make sure that we create systems which nothing is required. But is there a magic that we can really do something? And what Neha shows, I think there are issues all the time in something or the other, and only we are trying to put many things under the carpet, okay? And the soil is the carpet, okay? So open defecation, one solution is we don't want to see anything on the surface, and so we want to put below the ground. And of course we have created many systems, various kinds of things. I think the problems, every system has one or the other problem. There is no perfect solution, because we want solutions without doing anything or less investment, and then we rely more on how the government can help us in doing that. And always, and I've been seeing this cycle of subsidy. Initially, when government said ki we'll give you 1,500 rupees, at that time, yes, it's good money, we can do something about it. Then after 3 years, we meet again in the same kind of conferences, and they say, oh, 1,500, what can we do? Then after another round we negotiate and say, oh, let's increase 15,000 to 5,000, 1,500 to 5,000. And then you say, oh, 5,000 is good enough, we can do everything in that. And then again after 3 years. So I've been seeing this cycle for last 20, 25 years. But I think we need to be, and same thing is happening. Other day I saw the presentation on this open defecation and the kind of things that are done in Swachh Bharat. And one of the studies that revealed was that if you have to improve the present ones, the investment required is much more than building a new toilet. Now, if that is the kind of situation that we are leading to, I think we'll have to. I think I'll stop at this point of time, and then in the second round, we can talk about it.
Thank you, sir. I think if I understand what you said unless society starts valuing sanitation for what it is worth, if we leave these things the way they are, those are the outcomes that we will get. So I will switch gears now. I want to actually, one of the exciting things about the study is how it looks at septic tanks and leach pits and the differences and stuff. In my own experience before, I've heard these words dhamaka kui and kui, and so there are so many variations of these pits and tanks. I want to ask Professor Srikanth, sir, in the literature, the CPHU and the BIS and all of these things, the standard septic tank is God, right? But in our culture, we have many gods. How many of these lesser gods, the septic tanks and stuff that you see in practice, are actually, what is the thought process? Somebody must have thought something and built these things. There's some traditional knowledge. Is there anything to that, or these are misguided concepts which we should discourage actively?
I think as you compare septic tank to the god, I think if we compare, there is also innovation in how these gods have been portrayed as well. Because individual households or anybody who is coming up with a septic tank, they have their own innovations in that. Like for example, they don't build the base. It's a two-in-one, like septic tank plus soak pit in the same one. But that's an easier way for the individuals who don't understand what's the implications later on. That's happening. So as per the guidelines that is there, if we use a proper septic tank as such, as per the design, then you will, so if you, for example, if you take a soak pit, you consider the sludge accumulation to be anywhere between 0.16 to 0.2 liters per person. In a septic tank, it is higher, so 0.6 to 1.2, something like that. So it is, so what is happening is that the waste has to go somewhere, and people have come up modifying the whole concept of the septic tank itself. So that's where the real issues are. Like if we stick to the guidelines, I think it doesn't, I don't say that a septic tank treats everything, but then if we stick to the guideline of how a septic tank should be, it is contained in one place. And then handling of that and treating the waste is easier.
So maybe this is a good time to tell us a little bit about your thoughts about what needs to be done to these septic tanks to make them more efficacious, your work about your innovations.
With reference to our work, like what our target was like, India already has a number of septic tanks. Like most of the treatment systems in place is basically septic tanks are there everywhere. Like it's either open defecation, if it is not, it's septic tank, and then you have soak pits as per NEHA's data as well. So we came up with something called an empowered septic tank. It's for a single household. We can do it within a 3 by 3, like about 6 square meters area. Because the septic tank is underground, and the overflow of it, the sludge is not a real issue, because even the new rules that says that resludging in 3 years, once in 3 years. The issue is more to do with the effluent that is coming out, which is more of pathogens in it. So there are multiple ways of dealing with it. Like one of the way, what we call it as an empowered septic tank, because this is a unit you can integrate into already existing septic tanks. So the water that comes out is basically you need to reduce COD, POD, and reduce pathogens, etc. So the idea here is we integrated, it's called an hybrid wetland, but it's not like you require a larger area for putting up a wetland, but for example, a vertical wetland ideally requires 2 square meters per person per day is the size of the vertical wetland. Whereas in this case, it is somewhere, so total, sorry? So it is somewhere like between 0.5 to 0.6 square meters for a complete household of 4 to 5 people, and then you integrate into an electrochemical treatment which disinfects. It's not just the coliforms but also helminths. And this need not be a wetland, it can be integrated to any other treatment system, like if it is an anaerobic baffle reactor or any other intermittent treatment system can be integrated into an
Where does it
electrochemical
physically
one.
sit?
So a post-septic tank,
Post-septic tank.
you can come up with some other treatment, any other treatment which exists, and you combine after that to an electrochemical. The focus was also on killing helminthus eggs, so that was the major objective in that. Only advantage of integrating an in-between a partial wetland is that like helminthus eggs doesn't come out of this wetlands part, but coliforms do come, and then you have a disinfection in place.
Right. Thank you. Dorai sir, I'll come to you now. You're sitting between two streams of thought. On the one side, we have an environmental management approach, a philosophical approach, which says value systems, those are the things which will actually move the needle, and which is extremely correct. On the other side, we have very practical sort of approaches where the ship has sailed, we have built these toilets, we have these OSS, now we need to do something to fix the system. In between these two, and given you know India now, you've spent a lot of time here, given our resources and constraints, what are the pathways open to us now? Are there any solutions that you see from your evolution in Malaysia that can be applied directly? Or do we need to study, do we need to look further for more knowledge and explore further solutions in different directions?
Well, thank you. I don't think we have magic answers for for India, let alone any other place. But I just like to point out that when we talk about the value of the septic tank, so to the individual, what is he looking for? In the household, he wants something that he can forget about, and he wants to be able to flush and the thing goes away. And he doesn't want that coming out in his house or in any adjacent area. But if it is going into the ground, or if it is discharging invisible pathogens or helminths or whatever, that's the least of his concern, right? So whatever innovations that people have done on the ground is on this basis, that this is what I want, and the masons or whoever are designing it are addressing that need. So it becomes a public good now, that you as an environmental person, that protecting the community from these discharges, you want to have a better system. Now, how to do that? I think to marry these two expectations of the individual who owns the house and the city authorities or the health people who want to protect the community as a whole, this is where I think the challenge comes, right? So just drawing back again to Professor, you were talking, I think one of the first questions you asked was, why do this study when things have happened and all? So I think there are two parts here, right? One is what has already been done, and that's a legacy, that we have built. People have built these things over the years, and whatever they thought was the right thing, they built, and it's not right because of various reasons. How to put it right? It's a huge, tough question, and I don't know. I mean, I don't envy you that you are trying to come up with a solution for that. It's tough, but new ones, I think that's much easier. The new ones. Now here is where I think we need as a country, and for given specific local requirements, you come up and say this is what is minimum. That you cannot do anything lower than this, right? And then you must have a mechanism of enforcing that. That we did in Malaysia, right? And over time, we got good septic tanks built everywhere.
So, does that mean even retrofitting?
No retrofitting. So this is, I'm talking about new installations.
Okay.
That's easy. So retrofitting is very tough. And it's tougher in India because I've seen septic tanks here which are under the house. Nobody knows where it is. I don't know where the septic tank is, So how do you do that? That's a tough question. I cannot really answer that. But maybe you have research answers for that. So in Malaysia, how did we deal with it? We also had a small percentage of such things, right? So physically to go and retrofit, it's tough, but our numbers were small, right? And we are not using groundwater for anything. So we thought, let the pathogens die a natural death. Right? So just let the problem take care of itself. But where the problems are serious, in the sense that the density of the septic tanks is high, we had programs of interception. So we have sewer lines laid and intercept and close down the septic tank. That's how we handle that. The second way we handled it was through a tariff disincentives. So the regulated tariff for dislodging of a septic tank is much lower than something that requires much more frequent dislodging. So if you got something that is no base, for example, and it's soaking in and you require dislodging every 6 months, you are naturally penalized by the tariff. And that makes the house owner go and improve the system. So that's the only thing we have done. No physical intervention by the government or what to go and retrofit. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, sir. Neha, one of the things that was very interesting in the study is there's no connection between the size of the household and the size of the containment system that was being built, right? Can you build on that a little more? Why is that? I mean, just the economic status is driving the size of the OSS. Any insights on why the size of the OSS is such a big deal for a household?
Yes, thank you for the question. Before I answer that question, however, very, very quick clarification. Because a lot of the times we say the household had a septic tank but with an open bottom or with a leaching bottom. In this study, we have treated that as a leaching system. That is not a septic tank as per our definition. A septic tank is something which is watertight on all sides and can have varied outlets. Now, coming to the question of size, right? And this is something that I spoke about in my presentation also, and Mr. Durai also just pointed it out, that as a household, what I want to do is not engage with the system to as much of a degree as I can avoid it, right? And so when I speak to the mason, my requirement is to build something that will last a generation. And this is something that was revealed to us even when we spoke to households on the ground, when we spoke to the masons in the field, where anything that does not require emptying for 20, 40, 50 years is considered the gold standard in septic tanks based on the expectations of households and masons. So in fact, we see that even in this study, on average, when a system is reported as being emptied, it's 13 years old. So it has continued to function for 13 years before it has been emptied on average, right? And that kind of explains where the household's coming from. Because you're building it underneath your house, then there's that added hassle of, oh, we'll have to break the floor to really empty the system out. So they want to build something which they construe as being permanent, as they construe being hassle-free. And that is their key motivation. And just to add to what the other panelists have pointed out so far, it's not about going and doing something over. We need to realize that it is all a ladder, right? So sure, we may have achieved the goal of open defecation to some degree by building toilets, right? Now this is now that these toilets have been constructed, what next? That is the question we need to ask. And we're answering that question by building FSTPs and building STPs in a lot of areas, right? But the study points out to the fact that there is more waste streams than we are currently accounting for. And these new SBM constructions, in fact, in urban areas, if you look at the baseline, 10 to 15%, I think, was the number of households without a toilet in these 4,041 statutory towns. So this problem is not necessarily with systems that have been built in the last 5 years, but systems which have been built over the years and over the decades and have been in use for like all of these decades. So it's not just about building new systems, but now that you have household access to toilet, what is this toilet looking like, and does the system that accompany it really function? Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and I think it was a very necessary discussion in the sense we need to understand the household psychology and how they react to these things before we can, go in the future, the designing of the future systems and stuff. So we have a challenge of changing minds first before we can even fix systems going forwards. That is the bigger challenge, it seems like. Sir, with that, sir, Professor Tare, I would, really the question is, it's an intractable problem at this moment. Do we need to put in some systems, regulations? What is it that we need to put in as a software on top of this? Because Durai sir also mentioned that there was regulation and monitoring and enforcement, which eventually drove this thing. The kind of variety that we have, the kind of attitudes that we have, and the kind of systemic disconnect that we have between the government and what's happening in reality, where is the software and what direction do we need to take the software in order that we can make coherence out of this?
I think one of the claims that we make in the Swachh Bharat mission is that we have been able to create awareness. I think we need to seriously introspect that. Have we been able to create the right kind of awareness? Yes, we have been able to create an awareness in the sense that you should not be doing it openly, do it in some enclosure. To that extent, yes, awareness is I would say, created. But I think there is very little awareness that is there in terms of what is the end result of this kind of thing. And in my opinion, no kind of standards, designs or this would actually help unless until people themselves realize. So I think what we need to spend and invest, and once, as I said, long term, if people realize their actions are going to impact themselves, then things will change. The technologies and itself, I think the owners know what they want to do then, right? Because as you said, one of the concerns that they have is, I don't want to see that or engage with that anymore. So if I can construct a bigger one and I can afford to construct a bigger one, I will do that. But I cannot afford to do a bigger one and I still don't want to have a problem, then the next innovation that comes is don't have a pakka base, right? Okay, so it's a short one also. I will not see a problem because slowly and slowly it will go over. And this is how the improvements or modifications or what you can say septic tanks getting diluted or converted to leach field. This is how it happened, right? Because people don't want to engage with them, right? But I think ultimately what we need to look at is we need to connect that to why we want to do it at this first place, isn't it? Why we want to talk about the waste. If that, I think in real sense that awareness has to come, then people will find out their own this thing. And then they will even agree to build a sewer system if that is required or whatever. Because I think in long term, we are spending much more than what we are required to spend. Because ultimately now we are talking about, if there is an overflow from septic tank, yes, we need to do something for that. And nobody actually has worked out the cost, right? That if you use septic tank or this kind of system, we blame STPs and things like that, no doubt about it. But in long term, how much does it cost in both kind of things, isn't it? And which gives us a better kind of thing. So that we have to, and then ultimately we have to talk about the sewage management and then the overflow from the septic tank. If we don't have a septic tank, then something goes underground, then it impacts our own water resource. And then on one side we are talking about Jal Jeevan, Jal Mission, or whatever. So how are we going to protect? Because ultimately it leads to protecting the water resources, right? If you don't do that, it has an impact on water resources and we will end up spending much more. We are already spending 20 rupees a liter on the water that we drink and everybody has to spend. So if you associate that cost, but I think that kind of education, because we always want to have a quick solution, okay? I just want to give aspirin and let the fever go down, and that's the end of it, not cure the disease. But I think that's where we have to move, otherwise we'll keep talking about these kind of things, right? So real awareness, but I would not like go for uniformization, right? Everywhere the same norm should be applied or some same design has to. Let people take that call. Ultimately, they will take the call, unless until it's government money and then government says, I will give you the money only if you do that. That is where the standards work. Otherwise, nowhere the standards work. People will figure out on their own way, right? So we need to bring in that kind of, okay, why are we after all building these toilets? What is the purpose? One is, of course, privacy. So that problem to some extent we are solving it by providing toilets. But the other major problem that we want to solve is we want to protect our health of the people and water resources, right? For that, what should be our vision? And that, I think we need to take it to the people. In my opinion, the major role of the government is not to teach people to put the problems under carpet because we can't solve it or we cannot afford to do it. I think let's tell them, yes, it's a serious problem. Right now you're not able to do it, but ultimately you have to do that, okay? And no amount of government subsidy or government funding is going to solve this problem, okay? People have to invest, okay? Whether it is poor people or rich people, right? Everybody looks at how to fill up the stomach. So they should also look at how to empty the stomach, right? Some part, okay? And it should be their responsibility. So at no point of time we should give an impression that the government has a model that they can take care of their emptying stomach. If the government is not taking care of filling their stomach, why this responsibility? Right? So ultimately we have to give it to the people and let them come. They are most innovators. They will figure out what needs to be done to do that. Right. And only thing is, common goods, nobody has a right to spoil it. That is what government should look at, okay? Nobody is allowed to do.
So the standardization is only in terms of outcomes, not in terms of the methods and the processes that we use. Thank you. Professor Srikanth, I come back to you. I want to explore how to take this study forward. What do we do after this? We have understood to some extent what is the nature of the beast. And we have some sense for example, the Helminth is a villain, or what is the problems that will happen if these things are not addressed. We already have some efforts happening in terms of fecal sludge management. There are a few plants that have come up. Some states are actually going forward with a lot of efforts in this direction. Do you think that those efforts are the answer, or there are other directions in which you would, as an academic innovator combination, are there other directions that you want to explore? And here I would also like to throw in some of these innovations that are happening in the toilet itself, right? Yeah. So this continuum, how do you see this evolving?
One limitation that I've seen, like for example, to regulate the septic tankers, there's been made a rule that they have to go to the central sewage treatment plant and they have to dump it there and nowhere else. So in that sense, it is a good regulation for the septic tank to operate. But then that's also a limitation where, like for example, like if we cannot make that septic tankers to go to some private site where there is a clear advantage, because there are players like who wants to make use of for example, it's a private land, they co-compost or let's say anaerobic digestion with another type of waste which produces energy, right? So then there is a clear-cut advantage there, because the septic tanker, when they go and dump, they pay some amount, and then wherever the facility is there, that's a private owned land, let's say, they generate energy or manure, so there is an advantage. So but the problem that could be anticipated is like the septic tanker can also dump in between. That's the issue why it has been regularized. So I think one way of managing this, because as an individual household person, I won't be interested of what is happening, as said, and like I just want to get rid of it, or I'm not interested what is happening in the treatment as well. So if we bring in like private players, like who can earn something in through that, like a manure making or a energy making stuff, so who will collect it on their own at a fee, but then they have a larger advantage when they have the waste with them. So something on that lines may be an advantage.
And do you see any household systems, evolution in household toilet systems, even in the future, playing a role in handling this on-site completely, like an integrated treatment?
The only, I mean, there are many treatment systems at a single household unit. It only works, or it goes forward only when it goes into like let's say when it works based on the individual households interest, or whether they will be affording to give that space, right? The septic tank itself, they want to cover it under the house or somewhere. So so we can come up with a system. I mean, there are systems available where it's not just the septic tank, but when it goes along with the treatment system itself, if it is placed, so that will work. But then how many households will come forward and take it up is the issue. So it can still be a decentralized one, but what is that decentralized number is the question. Like how many people equivalent will be a decentralized one.
What will be the capex and opex burden for the household?
Yeah. So
those are the drivers that will.
Yeah.
Right. So let me come back to you, Neha, and ask you, where do you see this study going? If you were to be given another opportunity to take this further, what would you do next?
Right. So, just for some context, I'd like to circle back to what Professor Tare also said, that we need to ask questions like, why do we need to eliminate open defecation, right? Now, the motive remains the same. It is to protect public health. It is to protect environmental health, right? And this is all a push towards that. And given that these systems are divorced from their objective of imparting treatment in the imagination of the people who actually use these systems and the problem of the commons, I think while attempting to sensitize households is also a need to reorganize responsibilities. Right now, everything is delegated to the household, right, in terms of the decision making, in terms of the operation, and we're not getting much out of it, right? So, can we find a way to reorganize responsibilities, bring in private sector innovations like the kind of technology that Professor Mutnuri also talked about? If there are these OSS innovations, how do we structurally scale them up in a way that households are also able to exercise these options? Right now, they rely on masons for that sort of knowledge. Is there a way that we can scale up and give those options to the household? So it's very much local, it's very much regional, but at least you have a diverse set of options to choose from. And circling back to what Mr. Dorai also said, if these are tied to a standard, then the burden of fulfilling that standard or complying with that standard is on the technology provider, is on the manufacturer of the technological system. And at a household level, you still get away with doing what you always wanted to do and have a system of your liking, of your choice. Now, where do I see this study going? Well, I definitely think there is a potential to maybe try this out, to take this research into a few cities and see how many of these interventions are actually implementable, what can be done, what is the local thinking around this, and starting off with these case studies, I think and setting up these good pilot examples might be one way to engage higher levels of government and also gain a little more traction for this type of research.
Sorry, which interventions and pilots are you talking about?
So for something like effluent and grey water management, right? And I think it also ties really well with the Jal Jeevan Mission agenda that the government has come out with. Given that we're talking about rejuvenation of water sources, right? And like abatement of pollution. So from that perspective, but also from the perspective of reuse and recycle. So I think there is the current paradigm is giving us an opportunity to place all of these interventions within that larger context of water security, of Jal Jeevan, of Jal Shakti.
Right. So, with that, I think that's a perfect segue to asking you guys if you have any questions for the panelists. Please. So, Mr. Jha.
I'm Dr. P.K. Jha. I'm not supposed to, I'm very sorry to say, I'm not supposed to ask any question. because I have been in this field for the last more than 30 years, right, from technology development, implementation, right, everything. I would like to answer a few questions because the study that you have CPR, I was involved. Perhaps you might not be knowing. I was also involved. First, that question. Before that, we are talking about a septic tank. Septic tank was developed way back in 1835, and still we are sticking ourselves with the septic tank. There are a lot of problems with the septic tank. Everybody knows. There are other technologies that are much better than septic tank. There is one book published by the ministry, Decoding Sanitation. It was written by me way back in 2015. There are other technologies. I have given limitations and disadvantages of all technologies. For septic tank, first point is cost is higher. Management of septic is serious problem from septic tank. Everybody knows it is disposed of anywhere. It is more worse than open defecation. There are other technologies, like you mentioned ABR. If you have vertical, a spiral, or horizontal a spiral, you do it. Efficiency will be much better. You can increase septage after 8 or 10 years, not 2 and 3 years. That I have seen. I did it. Cost is not very high. Balram model you mentioned, that is also mentioned that is much better. So why we are still going to septic tank that was developed way back in 1835. Point number 2. In 2015, I was given one assignment by DUSIB, Delhi Urban Development, to provide suitable technology for public toilets. 73 sites there were. I was surprised. There was not a single site having appropriate design of septic tank. In Delhi, we are talking about not in a small area, rural areas. Most of the septic tanks are not as per the design. It is practically a holding tank. This is urban story that I have seen. That's a septic tank I have not seen in my life as per the design. Point number 2. In urban rural areas, size of the septic tank does not depend on the design. It depends upon the affordability of the household and land. If household can afford, it can go up to 10 meter. I have seen.
You have a specific question, sir, for the panel, or you're?
I don't have a specific. That first sentence was there. If you need, I can explain other technologies, but I don't have a question.
Sure.
If you sit, I can sit. That's
No,
not
I'm
a
just
problem.
trying to understand the comment you're making. It's,
Yeah. That's a comment. That is, size, it does not depend on the design. It depends on affordability. Point number 2. Before that, leach pit toilet. Everybody knows the leach pit toilet is not suitable for high water table areas. That book I wrote for the ministry. This is the first point. But you can see everywhere leach pit toilet. And that was the purpose of that evaluation, that study that you did, CPR. There is no regulation from the ministry or any agency. There is no regulation. Septic you can see in West Bengal, Bihar, flood affected area, even in Goa, I have seen leach pit toilet in rocky areas. That is lack of information. And that is a policy gap, you can see. There is policy gap.
would you call it a policy gap or more of a capacity building gap, in sense the local people have not understood the application
includes under policy gap. If your policy is perfect, capacity building will follow it.
Okay.
In policy, in guidelines, there is no mention anywhere that this technology, way back in 2015, January, first week of January, I had written letter to JS and Secretary also. And Secretary was very appreciative. He said, Dr. Jha will include. I requested, kindly send administrative letter to all states, not to implement single pit toilet under the policy. But it did not follow. Finally, there was a report in 2018, QCI, types of toilet. They disclosed, their report revealed that 32% toilets are single pit toilet all over India. The question of sustainability is a huge question mark. After 3, 4, 5 years, what will happen?
Sure.
Because you don't have septic management policy. Sure. You have policy. There is no, practically there is no policy for rural areas. These are some problems.
Comments are appreciated. In the interest of time, can I take some other questions also?
I fully agree.
Yes.
That's why I said I fully
Thank
agree.
you. Thank you very much. Can I just in the back and then?
Hello. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Nikita from OPM Delhi, and so my question is, I don't know, very conceptual, I guess, but if I'm not wrong, I saw in the presentation that you said most of the household and around like less than 2% had actually adhered to the septic tank, the correct measurement of the septic tank, and isn't that a very worrying question? Because to my knowledge, if we're just going to tell or recommend that regular desludging is a sustainable solution of septage management, then why are we even talking about retrofitting or even solutions like prefabrication and stuff? So I mean, how sustainable is telling the households that regular desludging is going to be a solution? And if we are suggesting alternatively retrofitting, how viable is that again? If only 2% are actually the correct measurement of septic tanks in India right now. Thank you.
Professor, would you like to take this? Should I?
I mean, regular desludging is anyway is going to happen. Like it has to be done, right? So it will incur expenditure on the households. So how well a septic tank is built will actually delay the process of desludging, which is like, if, for example, if the base is not built, it's only going to pollute the underground water. So that's what they are doing so as to delay the process. But if we regulate that the proper septic tanks are made, and then you have the sludge emptying needs to also be done, which is going to incur costs. So that's one way where I was suggesting that if there is a third party who is making profit out of it, like in terms of a manure management or an energy production part, then that type of cost will come down on the individual households. So where they won't mind having a regular desludging process in place. Right, so we need to look at those aspects.
Yeah. I think you cannot move away from desludging. Desludging is given for any kind of pervious or impervious system. What you can do best is how do you manage the effluent that comes out of the septic tank, and that's where different types of septic tanks will have different qualities of effluent. You'll just have to deal with it. In terms of retrofitting, I don't think we have all agreed that we don't have good answers to that question yet. And that's something we still have to explore. So our work is cut out on that front. Yeah. Thank you. Ma'am, welcome. Yes, please.
So I think we need to understand what's the purpose of the septic tank. Basically, it is a settling process, number one. So it is supposed to settle out as much of the solids as possible. But in terms of pollutants, of course, there are many types. There is the solids, there is the BOD or COD, and there is the pathogens. The pathogens, of course, some of them will get attached to the solids and settle, but the majority of them will go out in the liquid, right? And the design of the septic tanks, like what Professor said, is from the individual perspective, I want to dislodge it as less as possible, right? So I want to get rid of the solids. So I design it in such a way that the solids don't settle that fast. So then I don't need to empty it that frequently, right? So this is what the other aspect of having the septic tank function to the best possible way. And then the management, which is the regular dislodging, can do the second part of it. And then this combination of the design and the management will give you the best result from that septic tank. As far as the house owner is concerned, he wants to do less of the management and as far as possible design it in such a way that he can forget about it. So there is a conflict between what the house owner wants and what should be done, right?
Sir, so just to clarify, my question was actually how worrying is that 98% unadherence to the toilet technology
Simple answer is it is very much worrying. Okay, so there is no doubt that there is no worrying about it. It is very much worrying, and this is what we have said, that have you in the last 5 years solved the problem or created more intense problem? This is the question, and we have to be bold enough to answer that. Okay, so there is no question of not worrying about it. We need to worry about it, and probably more than the open defecation issue that we need to worry about.
Yeah. My question is addressed to Ms. Neha. Thank you very much for a very good study, but it had a lot of details. Hardly much could sink in. But, my understanding of this huge, huge problem is the fact that cities and towns could be connected to a sewer network, and then, of course, the authorities need to take care of that sewer, that it does not pollute the rivers and the water bodies, all that, whatever, through SCPs, etc., through constructed wetlands. They are not doing it very well. In Delhi itself, there's so much pollution going into the Yamuna, foam and all that can be seen. But, I guess that is the right way to do it for cities and towns. But for villages, for instance, where houses are, here and there, in a place like Uttarakhand, where, your study includes that, there also, houses are here and there, whatever, there is a lot of construction of houses together also. So, the government, of course, has come up with a big program, ODF, etc., etc. So, for villages, can, are panchayats playing a role in this whole thing of building toilets and taking care of all the sludge, that it doesn't pollute, it gets cleaned off, and that the sludge or whatever is used somewhere as compost or whatever? That is my one question. And the other is, of course, the people taking out that sludge, it just might be Dalits, are they, is that happening? Are people available to do that? And, but first and foremost, what would be the ideal, answer for villages which are widespread, homes are widespread, there's a panchayat with few houses, panchayats take care of it. And what about in the hilly areas like Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh, that's what I wanted to find out. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to touch upon all of the remarks and questions that you had. So first of all, why STP, why are they not adopted more widely? Why are city governments not adopting them more widely along with sewerage systems, where the responsibility is fully with the government, right? Now, see, just like everything, right, there's a cost-benefit analysis, and there's a significant amount of investments that are required towards these centralized sewerage systems. And beyond which point in terms of the population density of the city, do sewer systems become more feasible than these decentralized solutions? We have research studies which point that out as well, right? But we need to realize that it's not an either or situation. Even in cities like Delhi, right, you will have areas like Sangam Vihar, which are not going to be sewered in very many years to come, right? So we need to know that we'll always be on that spectrum, and we need to work with that reality. Now, your second question in relation to what should rural areas do and what are they currently doing. So we, in our work in rural Orissa, for instance, we've seen that toilets, of course, toilets have come up, but then the systems for emptying these toilets are still being put into place, right? And so a lot of the times households make use of either privately provided services, for which they then pay an exorbitant amount, or say if it's a large and dense villages, which we talked about in the morning as well, which is close to a ULB, which is close to a statutory town, then in some cases those publicly provided services can also be availed in these rural areas. As far as what do we do in super remote villages, Well, in these areas, if the hydrogeology permits, I think twin pits here may be a good solution, because then your population density is very low. You might not be threatening the underlying soil and water systems. And in fact, the rural sanitation strategy deliberates on FSM for rural areas, if in case you want to read about this a bit more. The third question on who is emptying the system, so you're very much correct. There is a degree of manual cleaning of these systems or manual emptying of these systems. People are still available in the cities, and yes, they do conform to certain social groups. We have seen this. And this I pointed out in my presentation too. Interestingly, when you look at what type of system is being emptied and then who is emptying that particular type of system, in with respect to pits, we saw that whatever pits were emptied, about 40 to 45% were emptied by these manual cleaners, right? And that is of course very worrying. And then we need to dig into this. What is the reason? Is accessibility a reason? Is it that you just don't have the right kind of equipment? What seems to be holding back city managers and city authorities from providing these services safely? Is a question that we need to think about also. I hope that answers your question.
But you know, for instance, say like a country like Scotland or Ireland, where you know the houses are again sort of dispersed and things like that. In the rural areas, I'm talking about, the sheep are reared and the cattle. So what happens there? What happens abroad?
Well, their systems are very, very well regulated. So that's for sure. In fact, in the 1970s,
Because they couldn't be connected to a source.
they're not. That is why, and this was the first slide that I showed during my presentation. In the United States, too, 20% of households still are connected to on-site sanitation systems, right? And presumably, they are all largely based in rural regions. So, but the systems for enforcement, the systems for regulation are much, much stronger there. So you will have septic tanks, but they will be accompanied by leach pits. And because the density is low, and because these considerations of hydrogeology are usually considered, the threat is not as much.
And the scale of the problem is much lesser when you compare it with a country the size of India. Ram?
Hello. My question is for Dorai sir. Since given the different varieties of septic tanks that exist, or if we are allowed to call them septic tanks, even that is a question. But the desludging interval may be faster or it may be delayed. Now, particularly with the case example that you gave from Malaysia, the enforcing the penalties on the desludging tariff, could you please elaborate on the process of it and the kind of because you need to also monitor it when they are emptying it, and what was the desludging interval that they had, so the data ecosystem that enables the central government of Malaysia to monitor that kind of a system, and also what is the balance that has to be created between retrofitting for the households to opt for retrofitting or to opt for the penalty that they are paying. So yeah.
And if I can tag another question on top of the 20 questions he asked, how much of it was IT enabled? Was it at that time when was there an IT backbone involved? Was it at the time or it was before?
Yes, yes. All this started when in the 1994 initiative by the government that all septic tanks must be emptied on a 2-year cycle. Right. So this regulation came in, and this meant that everyone had to be inventorized. All septic tanks had to be inventorized. So there's a huge exercise to do that. And the company, the private company that had to do the emptying, had to schedule everyone, right? So now there are either it is a septic tank or it's a non-septic tank. So we do not have such a range. I've seen Neha's thing is like so much. So it's either a septic tank which complies to a proper septic tank design. So in our case, it's a two chamber followed by a filter or by a soakaway, right? And with proper inlets and outlets, and sizing is based on a 24-hour retention of water, the amount of water that comes in 24 hours retention plus a sludge accumulation zone. So this is a design. So if it does not comply to the design, it is categorized as a non-septic tank or substandard septic tank. Then it is not subject to the scheduled dislodging, right? So the idea of the government was these non-standardized septic tanks will eventually be standardized. That was the intention of the government. So what happens is most of these non-standard septic tanks have open bottom, or they are leaky or something, because they've been built not following any standard, right? So then what happens is that within the 2-year interval period, okay, the rate that is for the scheduled emptying is a fixed rate per month. So they pay a monthly rate and they get dislodging once in 2 years. But those who are not standard, they don't pay anything. But when they call, they are charged a hefty sum, one-time hefty sum. And the chances are these guys will have a very frequent emptying. So when you work it out, you find that it exceeds paying the monthly thing by twice or thrice. So this, when they feel the pinch, then they will come and say, what can we do about it? And they'll say, convert it to a standard septic tank. And in Malaysia, they don't have it under the house, so they're able to do that with a standard septic tank. So I'll also add that in the last 15 years, use of prefabricated septic tanks has been very widespread in Malaysia. No one builds this brick and the cast-ins to do things, because the prefabricated septic tanks are compact, their footprint is small, the construction time is fast, and it also has a built-in filter inside, right? And these are regulated, and the manufacturing part is regulated. So as long as that it's a type-approved model, you just buy it and install it. So nowadays, new installations all are following this new one. So eventually, you'll find all this will just go away. So am I answering the question? Yeah.
Just a quick question to your this thing, like
oh, sorry, to Sasanka's question. So the IT thing. So of course, when the scheduling started, this whole thing went into a database. And that database is used to do the scheduling of septic tank, which even today Indawater has that database of, even though scheduling has stopped really, that's another story, but it continued to be built up. And when the septic tank is dislodged, further information is added, where exactly it is, what size, and things like that. Yeah.
So, sir, if the systems are different, like either a constructed on-site system or a prefabricated, so when you say 2 years desludging period, so that's common across all the OSs?
Yeah.
So on what basis 2 years have been
Yeah.
finalized?
We don't have that much of a variation like what is shown in your design, because somehow or other, I do not find in Malaysia the perception of people that bigger the better, So generally it conforms to the 2 to 3 cubic meters, which will be based on the design, which the Malaysian design also is following on 24-hour retention, 225 liters per person, 5 persons per house. So, and there's a sludge, a sludge volume. So it comes to about 2 to 3 cubic meters. So it is standardized. Now, how did the 2-year thing come about? They did some research, and they found out on average, the filling up of sludge, based on sludge accumulation rates, it reaches the interconnecting opening between the two compartments in about 2 years. So they don't want the sludge to overflow into the second one. But having said that, the new regulations now are looking at 3 years, because they are allowing a little bit of overflow into the second compartment, but not out of the second compartment.
And was the change from 2 to 3 driven by any emissions requirement, any balancing between ecological priorities, or it was a purely technical decision?
I don't really know, but there was at the same time there was what they called a liberalization exercise. So initially it was a one company doing this whole thing, and everybody felt it was a monopoly, So when they did this change, which came in 2008, they liberalized, which means you could call any company, and at that time it became 3 years. I don't know whether any research was done, but I guess they also found that maybe in 2 years' time when they're dislodging, it's very liquid.
Right.
And there's not much of solids coming out of that.
That's
so
why
that could be one finding.
The benefit of public health is offset by the greenhouse gas you are emitting. So I'm being told that we are out of time. I'm sorry, we'll take your question offline, right? So thank you so much for joining us here and for the nice discussion. Very quick summary, what we heard is our people lack awareness, our households don't care about anything beyond what's happening under their toilet. The government doesn't much care about what they do except build toilets. So you get the drift of what I'm saying. We are in deep shit. And that leads us to our next program, which is, I think we are going to solve the problem, or at least discuss it further into smaller pockets and see where solutions might emerge. We have enough problems, so thank you, and let's get to work.
So the next one will be the roundtable. I would like to quickly do a small exercise. Like I just need two people to say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So then we'll split it up. So from Tanvi we can start. I just need 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Like, you should, yeah, call the number. Yeah. No, sir. 2. Yeah. Yeah. 2. 2. 1. Backs. 2. Okay. No. You're 2. You're 3. No. He's 1. Yeah. So, sir. 1. 2. 3. 1. So all the 1, please come to the table 1. Santosh, sir, you'll be taking this case study. It's on OSS. Table 2, Santosh, you'll take care. That is on FSTP. Yeah. And table 3, it's Priska, who will look on the recycle reuse. So kindly segregate. We'll give the case study to you. 3 is active. All the 2s, please come to this table.
But it's okay. The red yellow soils and the very high water table, and we had the dark sandy soils, and very. So for that we had on spatial criteria. We selected the what?
Just to have an introduction of our roundtable panelist, Santosh sir is from and Priska here, she's from consultancy based in Netherlands, working on circular.
Just take the data as it is. It's not a real case, it's a hypothetical case.
I think we see it in the questions. So first is on the issues, right? What are the relevant? So maybe we can first start with the relevant issues that might be affecting to the recycle and reuse circular products.
They need to see a MLD.
I'll come to that. So steady as time with a 50% decadal growth, population will come up to 5.8 in no lakhs. That will be about 1 lakh households. With that, from non-sewage sanitation from 80% it will come down to 40%. Because UGD cover will go from 20% to 60%. And they are going to big cities. Any case where any city where they have adopted. So we have last some 5 more minutes. Then you're finished. Okay. So I moderator to come forward to present the case. Group 1, like who is like to present the case? From group 2, Nikita will be presenting. From we'll start with the group 1. Group 1. Yeah. So Ram. Okay. So I would like to give a short introduction about your case. Not much on the figures, just like to see the problem statement and how you solving it with the short-term, mid-term, and long-term plan. Over to you, Ramya.
Thank you, Amrish. We had a really tough and tricky situation. So it's a place where it's a 70,000 population city with a very high groundwater table. The groundwater table even is much higher during rainy seasons, like 1 meter depth. With respect to the soil situation, it's a city with a clayey soil So these situations make the soak pits not functional to its much efficiency. With respect to the on-site systems, most of the city is connected to either septic or tanks. They have not mentioned if it's a septic tank or a different kind of a tank. Then they have leach pits, single or twin. So that's basic, and most of them are connected to open drains. I think that's the context of the city. Now, what the problem statement was, we were supposed to, or the city commissioner wants a grey water management plan and to have a plan for the on-site systems. Given that with respect to short-term, medium-term, and long-term, so what we thought of as a short-term plan for first year is to firstly understand what the current situation is in terms of assessing across the policy, what kind of policy is there in place, what kind of planning is there in place. Oh, sorry. There is one more context to the city. They have a FSTP of 15 KLD. Did I miss out on any contextual setting? Santosh.
So there were in high incidence of health impacts.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So there is all this health impacts, and there is a surface water body as well crossing through the city. So that's with respect to the context. So what we thought of is to understand the situation across policy, across technical infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure is there, because the data that we have is very limited to understand what kind of whether it's a one chamber tank or a two chamber tank, but then doesn't go into details of the tank of what if it is lined or unlined, the other kinds of, and also so the two major objectives of the situation assessment is to understand the infrastructural situation as well as with respect to the public health impacts that the current situation has. Once we understand that, because one of our main objective is to or to design for improving the on-site systems. So what we thought of was having so the leach pits to be converted into improved systems. Given the time frame that we had right now, 30 minutes is very short to understand what kind of improved systems can we think of. But there can be one kind of a system where there is an inverted vertical flow of soak pits where and it's lined, so where the effluent from the septic tanks can enter the soak pits from a bottom and then flow upwards and then go out into the drains, open drains. So that is one of the improved systems that we were thinking of. There may be other systems which we need to explore in that 1 year period. And also understand what the financial ecosystem is and the socio-cultural aspects are. Once we understand that gaps and develop those strategies, we'll be retrofitting the existing systems, or at least there should be a policy for retrofitting the existing systems. Or the new systems which are coming up, they should be designed such that the effluent or the black water is managed safely at the household level. There will be scheduled desludging in the policy and enforcement of that policy in the short term. With respect to, in the short term, what we are also thinking is, because they have a surface water and there is the drain is acting as a kind of a sewer to transport the effluent into the open river water system. So what we were thinking of is having the drain and intercept those points, the outlets into the river water system. So that would be the drain interception and having a grey water management system in the 1 year period. Once post the 1 year period, in the midterm, we would be thinking about having decentralized treatment systems at the zonal levels in the city, where the drain intersections can be trapped and have a treatment system over there. What else did we think of?
So we will explore additional capacities.
Yes. We will, in the meantime, we would also understand what, if there is any nearby, because the FSTP right now is only of 15 KLD, and we would understand, and if it's a 70,000 population city, so obviously the waste generation is much more higher. So we would also understand if there is any nearby city where there can be co-treatment or a sharing of the treatment facility can happen. In the long term, we would have like the simplified CO system and an STP, because the decentralized treatment plant and with the existing FSTP functioning right now. I think that's it. If I have missed out anything, please feel free to add.
Oh, that's the first thing.
Yeah, that yes, yeah.
Thank you, Ram. That's quite a insightful thought in a short time for retrofitting and rectifying your on-site systems. Thank you, and thanks Santosh for guiding the whole team. Thanks. Yeah. From team 2. To give a short brief about your problem statement and what ideas you got for this.
Okay, good evening. So, what we were given the case as we are given the case of a tier 2 city whose the population is 4.5 lakhs and there is almost 90 lakhs, 90,000 households, and the 80% of the city is having 20% of the city is having sewer connections and 80% of households having septic tanks or non-sewered. And other than that, there are 4 trucks because there is a desludging capacity of around 30 KLD per day, and there are 4 trucks who do this desludging daily, and the capacity of each of the trucks is 4,000 KLD. Now, we were given to estimate the case for after 10 years at a 15% of increasing rate. So the population would go to around 5.2 lakhs, that is covering almost 1 lakh households, and 40% of the households will be, because there is a plan for increasing the network coverage to 60%, because the current state is 20%, so there will be a 40% increase under the AMRUT scheme. So it will be 60% underground coverage after 10 years, so rest 40% will be non-sewered, and so there will be STP capacity will also be increased from 20 MLD to 60 MLD. So what are the options we needed to look for?
So I'll just elaborate from there. So basically, now the problem statement is that in the government is asked that in the 2 years we have to plan how to deal with this situation of the situation where 40% of the city is still unsewered, and the case also said that the non-sewered sludge is getting openly getting these dumped, openly getting dumped in the available open spaces. So how to rectify this through the policy planning, technical, socio-economic, socio-cultural and financial planning. So yeah, 1 second. I think this is first.
You can go ahead.
Yeah. So basically the very first short-term plan at the technical front would be to do a feasibility study to find out if the existing STP structure can be actually made into an integrated co-treatment system, and also explore options where the existing fecal sludge from the non-sewered system can be treated through trenching system and other interim solutions, while making the capacity, increasing the capacity for sewage treatment plant and fecal sludge treatment plant in the long run.
So in the medium term, because we were discussing about a new FSTP or an integrated system, because there was the sludge is also there and there is a 70 tons per day of solid waste also. So there were options for going for a DPR for new FSTP or a kind of a new integrated system. And the long term, there are also if co-treatment is possible, because this thing 60 mLD capacity is also there. So if we go for a co-treatment also, and if we go for FSTP also, so that can be also a long-term approach. And socio-economic perspectives are like the ultimate aim is to go for the behavioral changes of the people. So we have to more indulge into the IEC activities or kind of this awareness generation activities. So
Yeah, so even the IC activities, we are focusing on two main things. Is first one being the focus on desludging, which the households need to be made aware of about regular desludging. Together with that, even containment structure knowledge needs to be increased. So that's why OSS designed there that in not just household but also masons need to be trained, and I see around that is necessary that even masons stick to the design which is there for septic tanks. And then in the long term, of all the interventions and the planning that we're doing for in every aspect, technical planning and everything, doing an impact evaluation study for that. Sorry, this is supposed to be the last bit of the planning, but this is coming now. Then starting with the policy, first of all, uh, in the short term, we need to lay down the guidelines against open disposal of fecal sludge, as we saw that the city, the non-seaward households, their fecal sludge is getting dumped into the open. So a guideline for that is the very first step in the short term. And secondly, again, a lot of research and planning around FSM seems to be missing from the case scenario, so we thought even proposing that would be a great idea. And secondly, in the midterm, guidelines for scheduling regular desludging again, because right now the case says that the desludging is happening between 8 to 10 years on an average, so guidelines for that. And long-term policy would be to create a policy on a more integrated approach where both the non-seaward and seaward connections can in fact be integrated into one instead of having a separate system for them. And then regulation of desludging vehicles. Right now there are currently just 4. So in the long term, we would want to have more on board, and their regulation, if we're going for private players, then their regulation would be required.
yeah, so coming to the policy options, for the short-term policy options, because we are having only 4 trucks of 4,000 KLD capacity. So what we can do is that, and our current diesel is only 30 KLD. So we can understand that only 2 times each truck is being used. So for the short term, what we can do immediately, like increase the frequency of the using of trucks. Other than that, we can create a database on the OSS system. And third thing is that we can do a feasibility study for the FSM. And for the medium term, like plan for scheduled desludging, because here we are given the case for 2 years. Like then we have to create a plan how can this like a kind of schedule that how can we make this happen each in 2 years for all the households. And in long-term planning, like if we go for an integrated approach or anything kind of thing, so we have to go for a business model. So how can we use a business model around this FSM strategy? And also our ultimate target is to, because the ideal situation is having 100% household coverage. So how can we plan for 100% network coverage, UGD coverage? So that is our long-term strategy. Okay, so finally the last part is the financial, and that's the most critical of any planning thing here. So how can you, whatever you have planned, what do we do, impact assessment and all those things, but to happen those things we need money. So whatever the source, what are the sources where we can mobilize the money? So we can mobilize funds from different type of funds, like CSR can be one option. Other than that, we suggested like options like MP-led fund is their local area fund, or finance commission grant, so Fatain finance commission grant or something like that. Or if we tap funds from any multilateral or bilateral funding like GSZ and other organizations are there, so if we can get funding from there. Other than that, for medium term, so these are the short term strategies. So one time we can get the fund from there for planning of the major activities. Now for once the things get constructed, the medium term, so what we can do, like we can go for sewage taxation, like water tax. Some cities are doing, I think Bangalore or some other cities, they are going for sewage tax also. And other than that, in long term, we have to go for a, like, now the things are made, so we have to go for a plan for operation and maintenance, how we can do for all these things. And we have to do like revenue management through this whatever tax we are collecting from people and other sources. So that was the whole thing. If we had missed out anything.
That's pretty comprehensive one. You guys like made a DPR in 2 minutes. I think the city will be like super clean now, yeah. And commissioner is so happy. Thank you guys. Thanks Andy. Thanks team. Thanks to team B, yeah. So now from team 3, reuse and recycle. Over to Dheeraj, yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Dheeraj Sanzasani and with me is Bitosh. So before we begin, I'll just set the context. So we are talking about a city, the Alpha city, which has about 23,000 households and 20% of those are connected with the sewerage network, and that is ultimately connected to a 5 MLD STP. The 80% of the households are connected to septic tanks, and the city has a 20 KLD of FSTP. So the STP generates about 100 kg of sludge every day, and the FSTP produces 1000 kg of treated fecal sludge every day. The farmers around the city, they want to shift from inorganic farming to organic farming. So the case is about utilizing the output products of the FSTP and to produce co-compost to make the organic farming going on. So yeah, we'll first focus on the issues that we have in the different segments. First is the technical issues, because when we're talking about co-compost, it's not only fecal sludge that you're dealing with, you're trying to deal with solid waste management as well. And you need a lot of quantity of segregated wet waste. So it's not only fecal sludge, it's about solid waste management as well. Either of these fails, your model will fail, because there's a certain ratio that you need to maintain about the mixing of fecal sludge and solid waste. So that's first. Another is the standards and the regulations of the output products, because there is some standards on compost, but no standards on co-compost where you use a fecal sludge. So whether it's okay to use it in the crops which are like vegetables, or is it okay only for horticulture or what? So that standards are not there. So that's another technical issue that we should deal with. The other is social acceptability. So a lot of times farmers, if they know that it's coming from something from toilets or fecal sludge, it's not easy for them to adopt those co-compost. So that social barrier is there, and we need to address some sort of policy or some IEC on that. Next is regulatory mechanisms for the private operators, that they collect in a safe manner, get it to the treatment plant, and the output products are there, available there for the organic farming. And the SOPs for safe collection and transportation of the private operators. Financially, I guess if this model has to work, there are three sources. One is, of course, the selling of the co-compost. Another is because you've got your wet waste segregated, now you also have your dry waste, so you can explore that possibility and extend that circular economy model as well. Like you can sell your dry waste to the recycle industry. And third is tipping fees, like the private emptier, when it reaches to the treatment plant, and they pay a tipping fee for disposing the fecal sludge that they've got. Another issue is the health issues. As I mentioned, like if you're using fecal sludge, we have been given some standards, like the quality of the output products that we get. the helminthec is about 1500 count per gram. So that if you're using that in a farming thing, you need to make sure that like the standards are maintained and the health issues are not there in the farming, because this will be circulated in the agri market, and ultimately we all will be eating food which was produced using co-compost, which is made up of fecal sludge. So that health issues needs to be addressed. So now we have some policy level interventions, short term, medium term, and long term. I'll hand over to Vitush for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to add, I think we were discussing about reliable quality and quantity of both the inputs, because we are talking about co-composting here. How good is fecal sludge for the segregated solid waste, or how good is the segregated solid waste for the fecal sludge to be, of course, co-composted together is something we need to look at. And also we have the parameters of both the fecal sludges. So if there is any kind of further treatment required before we do co-composting, of course co-composting also acts as a level of treatment, but that's also one of the issues we thought we could think about. Any other issue the table wants to add?
Yeah, about the fact that people were, collecting the sludge should only have machines do it, not by hand.
We should avoid touching the fecal sludge. Yes.
So another issue is the tariff of the product is sold to and the farmers. So what should be the tariff of the cost of the product?
Cost of the product. Quality and the cost of the final product is also what we thought.
Maybe initially subsidized, and then after that the subsidy slowly, gets removed.
Yeah, we'll come to the solution.
And also the fecal sludge part shouldn't be so publicized. After it's tested by the laboratory that meets all the parameters, then it should be sold as a very good manure.
Yes.
It shouldn't be publicized that it's fecal
And
and all that.
so our table debated upon this topic a lot, whether we should tell people that this compost is actually from fecal sludge or not. Okay, having said that, though it's a hypothetical situation, I doubt 20 KLD plant we will get 1000 kg of dried fecal sludge. That's my concern, but nevertheless it's a hypothetical situation. So in short term, within a year, we want, first we should develop a input sourcing plan, which would mean that what is the flow of segregated solid waste, what's the flow chart, how is the fecal sludge coming in, how is the segregated solid waste coming in, are we segregating at the source, or it is the segregation after it reaches a particular point. So we'll make a source plan for that. Then we are looking at development of SOP for co-composting. How are we going to go about doing this co-composting? What ratio are we going to mix? Where are we going to mix? Things like that for SOP, including wearing gloves, so on and so forth. Then we thought that instead of segregating at one particular point, because it's co-composting, we need to look at solid waste chain as well. So awareness generation in the aspect of segregation at the source itself, so that it's much easier to handle the segregated product when we are thinking about co-composting. And then, so we debated upon this, that would awareness generation be enough, or we need to have some kind of measures which are punitive. For punitive actions, we thought we should have a bylaw. So of course we were supposed to talk about reuse, recycle, but bylaw which is for FSM should also include some kind of provision for segregation of solid waste, and if anybody is found not segregating, could be levied some kind of fines. Because we are talking about co-compost, in short term we thought we should also do a market study. Of course there is in the background, it's written that the farmers are looking forward to this product, but we need to look at what is the kind of quality of product required, what are the crops being done around that city. Also, what is the kind of pricing that is kind of prevalent in that city is in the short term we thought we should do. Having said that, a pilot thing could be to be done to demonstrate how using organically done co-compost gives results in terms of crops. That could also add to the awareness generation towards using the or killing the social aspect which we talked about in terms of using the co-compost for crops. Did I miss on something?
The testing of the inputs you mentioned, right? Is more
Yes. Yeah. So because we are co-composting, we have 3 streams of inputs. We have fecal sludge from STP, we have fecal sludge from FSTP, and we have segregated solid waste. So before we kind of mix it the way we want to mix it, we need to make sure that they are also following some kind of standards in terms of, so basically they are treated to the level they should have been before they are mixed together is something we should be taking care of. If we come to medium term goals, we said that we should have the standards set for the final product. After co-composting, what is the expected output? So for that, there should be some kind of standard setting done. And ongoing, is it promotion?
Yeah, promotion, yeah.
Yes. So ongoing promotion of the co-compost, which is in continuation to the awareness generation. We thought short term may not be enough. It should continue to finally have a good market for the final product. Also, there are inorganic fertilizers available at subsidized rates. So in medium term aspect, we thought we should have some kind of subsidy given to the farmers for organic compost, and it should not be a subsidy which goes on forever. So what we thought was there could be several ways that in the beginning the subsidy could be given, but in due course of time the farmers would realize that how good this product is, and eventually the rate could be the actual rate, or we could think of giving a subsidy to the final product, which could be said that this final crop is grown organically or something, and that could be like a cross subsidy to the farmers, an incentive for them to use the co-compost. And so this is a very broad thing which we have said, that we need to integrate solid waste management to fecal sludge management. If they work in isolation, then co-composting will not happen. We need to kind of integrate the two right from the beginning. So in medium term, we thought that we will be able to achieve the integration. Some kind of certification of the co-compost, which will make the, so then you don't need to prove the quality of the product if there is some kind of certification done to the final product. So which would mean, so if there is a certification done, which would mean that this will have certain carbon, certain nitrogen. So the buyer of, or the farmer would already know that if I buy this product, I don't need to kind of check the background of where this stuff is coming from. So in the long term, we thought if this certification can be done, then the market is not just the neighboring farmers, it could be sold beyond. For financial sustainability, we also debated along not just to sell the co-compost, we're looking at, because we'll have segregated different streams of waste. The plastic waste could be recycled, solid waste. The liquid component could be recycled, sold again. Also, things like if we can include tipping fees into, also to look at the financial sustainability of what we are trying to achieve. And eventually, so it's not that the government has to do everything. We can, of course, outsource the whole chain to a private player, once proving that it's a good business model, right from maybe collection of fecal sludge to collection of solid waste to selling of the final products to different streams. I mean, there could be different boundary lines to it, but once we prove that it's a good business model, this could be, the private players could be encouraged to pitch in. Okay, if I've missed out something, so you can add.
Thanks, Dheeraj and Vityush. That's a history of the black gold, way forward in FSM. So, thanks, guys. So much of thoughts, so much of ideas, lot of practical solutions. I'd like to give again one round applause for everybody here. So now we are nearing the closing session. Over to Shashanka, sir.
Thanks, Amrish. So, I'm sure Santosh and Vitush and all of you guys are like, I wish data was so easy to come to me. So, it has solved the FSM problem by now. It's my distinct pleasure to close this session out with a discussion with two very eminent people. I request Sri Prashant Mahapatra to come, please, sir. He is Project Director, OWSSB, and his contribution to sanitation and FSM is very obvious in Odisha, and that story is inspiring. We'll discuss more on that story now. Thank you, sir. And I'd like to request Professor N.C. Narayan from C. Tara, IIT Mumbai. So Professor N.C. Narayan is also an innovator. His innovation is non-technical in nature, and it's a very interesting approach to problem solving, which we'll hear from him now. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Like I was saying, some of these case studies were, solved in a very detailed manner, right? And that was very good to see, except most of the time these gaps are actually undocumented gaps, right? And we don't even know what these gaps are. So here, Amrish and team did a great job of presenting the gaps in a nice synthesized manner. My question to you is, how do you go about looking at these gaps? What are the gaps? Can we just have a quick overview, and not just from an FSM perspective, it's like a larger sanitation sort of perspective. So,
what is the angle through which you...
So, you take a perspective which is more of a umbrella, so policy, planning and policy gaps. And
I think, the major issue is, when we talk about non-network systems, what does the network systems offer is the major question that we can ask first, It is big finances, that brings in big consultants, and it brings in a lot of incentives for the contractor, for the engineer, for the politician. I think that is the elephant in the room. I think that's why the policy sticks in a way with network systems. So it's a major battle which is actually kind of, against the current. I think that's what brings us together also in this room. I think, how do we so each of these issues we can actually tag as kinds of, part of the kind of solutions that we are kind of bringing up. So I see this as a kind of, joint journey where we are kind of jointly learning. And what I have done is, I've done critiques of policy and all for 10 years. And then last 2 years, I tried to work on a small town. So one of the major issues that I will tell is that, let us first disaggregate the context in policy. We have these two big mega kind of cities. We have, then we have other tiers of cities. And then we have rural areas, and then small towns. So I think small towns are the kinds of areas that I would like to kind of work with, because anyway JNNURM was majorly in 2 cities, and then the less 3, 4, 5 also gets a lot of money. Rural area, it's not a kind of big issue, but small towns are the the kind of urbanizing towns. That's the area that I am kind of interested in.
So one of the things I was trying to elicit was gaps in terms of, here we were spoon-fed, but how about data gaps at the lowest level? How do you see these gaps impeding our ability to solve these problems in a holistic way?
Yeah, again, I think, a centralized solution has first a kind of thumb rule of 80%. And then I think we get this big consultants actually coming and kind of doing the design implementation. Whereas in a non-network systems for decentralized solutions, we need very fine-grained data. And fine-grained data starting with the kind of each toilets, each households, and then to kind of locales and then coming to towns. So, and we don't have any kind of finances for getting consultants to do that, and they can't do it also in a way. So one of the things that we found was that, it needs a kind of much more skill sets to kind of do this analysis. It needs very interdisciplinary kind of insights to kind of do this. So I think that's a major gap that we found, and we also, I'm very glad that, actually, Shubhagato and I met 4 years back when he was doing Udaipur. I was doing something on Alibag, and so I think we are groping in the dark, and so that's what connected us, and I'm so happy to see that, we're still kind of traveling the path together. We also did the same kind of exercises. We showed them some photographs also, like flip charts we made of to understand what is below the ground. Otherwise, they could not kind of come out with. And you have very good data of 92%. People in Alleppey thought that 82% of them were septic tanks. And when we analyzed the photographs and all, we found it was only 30%. And then we went back to the masons who are doing that. We did an FGD with them. We asked them to kind of draw the design. And those are bottomless pits also. So, so I think one of the things is that, can we kind of make some kind of a methodology to kind of understand this, and then who will do it is the question. So,
great, sir. Thank you. We will explore this more in the next round. Prashant sir, we all agree. I think everybody here is very clear that the first gap in fecal sludge management is the treatment plant. Like you need a designated disposal site. One of the biggest problems sort of gets addressed, and Odisha sort of pioneered that part of it. They built about 9-11 FSTPs in the first round, and that problem they addressed. But the interesting question is, having addressed that gap, what other gaps opened up because of that? What came to the front because you closed one gap? One bottlenecks are never removed; they just move from one place to the other, right? So you remove one bottleneck, the next bottleneck comes into the picture. So my question is, what was the next bottleneck?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Before answering that question, I will reflect on these three presentations.
Right.
And in fact, when I work in the field with the government, building up STPs and doing so on and so forth, even STPs also, and these are the kind of data actually you get in the field and to my table, in fact. And this is the kind of analysis you used to do. You will never get detailed information. So, like the 8 FSTPs that we built and 2 by them. So we didn't go into those details of number of septic tanks and all those so based on the broad assumptions and thumb rules, so we went on designing and doing that. Now to your answer to your question. So once we did that, many things came up. For instance, we never knew the number of septic tanks. We never knew the number of trips. Even we never knew the number of private players. To start with, we never know. We assume maybe they are 10, maybe they are 50, we never know. So it so happened, once we started implementing the regulations, our FSTP's capacities, we found them overloaded. So we didn't have FSTP. Now, once we had, now that is getting, saturated, overloaded. And in some instances, initial period, we found, for first 1 year, we found the septage is simply not coming to the FSTP. They were discharging as they were discharging earlier, so they were not coming to the FSTP. Then we found what is done. What we did, we bought cesspools for the ULPs. Now,
we found many ULBs were not using the cesspool. So we brought their cesspool to our FSTPs and those vehicles, cesspool vehicles. So we started running them and we did the free servicing. So we service all the government institutions and hostels and cantonments and so on and so forth. And to simply to run the our plants. Now we had the regulation, so that was enforced. We found the regulation was not there, so that is why septage was not coming. So once we implemented that very strictly, it so happened in Bhubaneswar first. So the commission was very strict, and one fine morning we found from it was a 75 KLD plant, so we are getting around 15 to 20 KLD. See, it went up to 60, then 100, then 120, just like that. So now we are planning to build one more FSTP, augmenting the capacity of FSTP. Previously we didn't have, now we have, then the regulation, then the streamlining of the septage transport, so lot of changes, then augmenting capacity. So this is how we learn. So we never planned, otherwise you would have planned a bigger one in the first instance itself.
Thank you, sir. Now this is interesting. To me, these two gentlemen actually represent two vastly different approaches to solving a problem, right? We haven't yet explored Professor NC's way of looking at a problem completely. So let's come back to that, sir. You were Prashant sir said data was not there, but they have enough of tacit knowledge to take decisions and move forward. In the beginning, capacities are not a bottleneck. So when you're starting from zero, a capacity is not an issue. So the first plant will run, regardless of whether you plan it properly or not. But your approach. But I can add you one.
Regarding the capacity, we had a lot of agencies helping us. For instance, CPR was there to help us in framing policies. CAC is there now. Is there, building capacity of our engineers, and you were also there. So many people are there. Practical action, they were also there. So we get a lot of supports also. It's not that we did alone everything. So because it was basically teamwork. So many people they came forward. And if you had to wait, we would have waited for 1 or 2 years to get data and design, go on. That is, we thought it's simply not worth to wait for all those data.
Yes.
I had only 18 students with me, and we had no money. So, and Alleppey had this very good solid waste management system, like decentralized collection, segregation at source. So, because their solid waste dump failed. So, I think that was the kind of, so that's why we chose that. And the second reason was the canals in Alleppey, a very beautiful network of canals, which all kind of very polluted. So, our starting point was that, how do you, before that actually one PhD has done DWATS, and she has proved that actually DWATS works very well and many other decentralized technologies work well at the institutional level. So the question that we asked was, how can decentralized technologies be scaled up to a town level so that we can address a water body? I think so. Then it should be part of governance also. Technology. I think institutional issues and then policy issues and implementation. So we had these 4 levels of issues we want to study, and we didn't have a model also. So what we try to do is first we developed a methodology using mobile apps to kind of track the canal. And then that is the OSM tracker, and then this ODK collect, that was for the socioeconomic data, using mobile apps, So my 18 students in a week, they actually developed the methodology. And then we trained the local engineering college students who were always there. They, in 4 months, they actually kind of refined this methodology. Then in a summer school, we brought 330 students from all over India, all IITs, NITs, and as 2 batches, 160 each, and they mapped the entire network, and that's how the data was collected. So our idea was, how do we bring this supply gap of data and demand gap of knowledge of the engineering institutions, which are very textual. And they don't know how to kind of solve an issue. And IIT students go to IIM, they study a bit of finance and HR and strategy, and then they go to PwC. And then only they can plan only big things. They can't kind of think small. In a small town, a panchayat, those kinds of solutions are very difficult for them to make. So I'm very convinced that, you need in ULBs, you need partnership with local academic institutions who can actually do this, and then they can actually kind of ask Bharti questions. For example, my students do the civil engineering survey of all the canals, dimensions, silt accumulation, and then they designed, they used the PWD's price software and made a budget, which was actually kind of 12 times lesser than what PWD has made. So now so a large group of people at the local level know that, that brings in transparency and accountability into governance also. And what my students got was a very rounded knowledge of society, of stakeholder interaction, socio-economic survey. They're engineers, policy, So I think, so can we kind of institutionalize this into the curriculum is one question, which can then do two things. One, very good analysis at the local level about these things. MG Narega also, we have done the same thing in rural area in Maharashtra. Students have actually planned in, that MG Narega is, if it is failing, it's because panchayats are not planning. It's a middle class failure because of poor suffers. So can students go and, but it's very simple things, And if it's not simple, if it's complicated methods, let us kind of divide it into, so that's what we did, we divided it into small fragments and demystified this whole methodology. So I think that's what I think. So knowledge generation was basically done by them, and then I think this gap, this supply-demand knowledge gap was filled.
We get that, right? We've used students, so most of us treat interns as slave labor anyway. We're used to that, and we did it at low cost. But why can't, if it was a Suvraj system, a high-class professional would have come and done the data collection and the engineering and all of that, and you would have a certain sense of confidence and certain sense of repeatability about the work that was done. What is this process adding that we take the risks associated with non-professionals gathering data? And even if they then go to a professional to get the work done, why would we choose this method?
Because the other one takes for such fine-grained data to be collected, it's almost impossible for a high quality consultant to kind of come and mobilize that. That's one. Second, it needs a kind of interdisciplinarity and patience and a lot of tacit knowledge also in a way of the local context, and so that's why local students and local faculty also actually. So the local engineering college principal was a civil engineering professor also. He got very excited about this whole thing. So I think, he also then, and there's a lot of innovations that can be made, The Mr. Consultant will come to today at Alapi, tomorrow Visakhapatnam, and day after to Baroda. So he can't be kept, in a way, and this person cannot monitor, and he will not have this interdisciplinarity. The sociologist expert will come, the environmental engineering expert will come, who may not kind of talk to each other also, and even if they talk to each other, we know the kind of depth of information that are coming. And I think I won't call it slave labor at all. I think you are actually kind of extending a lot of services to the students by actually taking them as interns. Because I've seen how when they come back, the kind of roundness that they come back with.
Sure. Thank you. So Professor NC is actually solving a much bigger problem we are lucky that he's solving his problem through WASH, and we are getting the benefit of that. So thank you for focusing on WASH when you are trying to make your students into leaders. Sir, Prashant sir, now we get this, that the FSTP was made and then regulations came in place, and then the purpose of the FSTP is now being served much better, right? What changes do you see now? What happened as a result of that? And how much of this has changed the thought process between you and Mr. Patnaik? Let me go from you to up and ask the question that way. Because that is where I think one of the biggest mindset changes needs to happen there. So,
yeah, so we took the, this Amrut mission, the fund that came. It was a big boost for us. So we got the opportunity to, build septage plants in number of cities. Then we have now a mission of, taking off septage management in all the 114 urban local bodies. So scaling off in all the cities. So it is the biggest challenge is how to scale up. And we have already tendered, So as I said, to collect data for all the cities, again it will take ages. So therefore we are not going into detailed data collection. So we rely on the way we design and we build. So now we have almost standardized the design and the tendering systems and the BOQs and all those things. So that way, and also earlier we procured a lot of cesspool vehicles and we supplied to them. So now we will be providing FSTPs to them, septic treatment plants. And now that the regulation is in force, so in effect, that is also getting enforced. So in the coming, and all the 114 urban local bodies, they have notified. So technically, it is being applied, in all the towns. And it speaks about, about the septic tanks. So now the issues that would come, what are those septic tanks, whether they are there or not, or the single leach pits or twin leach pits, connected to drains, connected to soak pits, so whether they are as per the standard or non-standard. So those issues are coming up. Building or construction of septic tanks, then how to achieve that gaps, that is coming up now. It will definitely come up. And who will run the cesspool vehicle, whether it's the ULB or whether the private players. And if it is private player, even we have done the tendering, outsourcing of transport, cesspool transport. We were successful in some cases, not successful. We also explored why we are not successful. So depends upon the volume of septage that is getting generated. So now everything is in a flux. So once you have started doing all those things, so we thought it is a starting condition. We have provided so much trucks and all that. So we will be sitting happily. But it's not that kind of situation. Now monitoring all those activities for all these 114 ULBs. So I was talking to Ram. So what you are thinking in terms of monitoring? What app he has developed? So I would like to have that app in my mobile. So wherever I go, I should be able to look at all those features. So somebody should help me in that also. So these are the dimensions. And like we discuss here in the groups also, what to do with the end product. There is no standard yet for the dry sludge from the septage plant. And so these are the new area, so it's not an end game in itself. Building FSTP is not the end in itself. So it's a lot of work.
Let me ask you a clarifying question. So in the first 8 towns, they built the FSTP first and then figured out how to bring the sludge to the FSTP. In about another 30 towns, they outsourced the truck without an FSTP and did a disposal mechanism, and now they are going for a treatment system. Now, which of these methods or approaches is?
Now, what we did, we didn't have FSTPs, but we had, deep row, not exactly deep row, it's shallow, shallow trenches. So So we had shallow trenches that was taking care of immediate requirements. So to at least to meet the NGT requirement, we
okay.
can say that yes, we do not know how much is getting polluted, but the site selection has been done as per the norms of Pollution Control Board. So to start with, we have done that. Not that we waited for all those things.
Yes.
But it takes time.
Great, sir. Thank you. So, Professor NC, I think I keep coming back to the students and how we are exploring this with them. What is the community's perception of this?
There's no community.
There's no community.
There's no community. I've seen kind of people running to jobs and people running to schools and colleges, and so I don't see a community. There are residents associations. So I think that's the step of the work that we are doing. So that's why we thought student citizen is the kind of thing. So we had to make a citizen out of the people.
So that's why local
and the
students.
community. That's why local students, and now we are actually working with. We have 10 sub-canals. So once each sub-canal is taken by a school. So we are now working with the science clubs at the schools, and so on 24th there is a big kind of a declaration where students are going to come with soil, and we are actually working at three levels. One is grey water, black water, and solid waste. So solid waste is the kind of entry point to many of these things where they really see the kind of need for that. And then there is something called Harita Karma Sena, like the Green Army, which was a project of the government, but many towns did not take it up much. So Alleppey took it up. We have 70 women now segregating plastics and kind of selling it and things like that. So they get a kind of element from the municipality. So we thought that even for the water bodies to get clean, more than 50%, 60% of the waste is actually solid waste. So I think that is one of the major things that we are doing. So we did one hotspot, which is actually a slum-like earlier manual scavengers colony, which had only pit toilets. So I think when Shashanka was CDD director, that's when we actually took it up. They actually changed all 50 toilets and connected to a DWAT system. So that was one hotspot. Another hotspot was a catering unit, which the Pollution Control Board gave them a notice. So I think only with a fine-grained data, this. So we had kind of 800 households in that catchment. So we call it actually, instead of watersheds, base watersheds. So base watersheds is actually adding the drains also into it, the flows. And can we actually do it at that level physically is one question. So one, better septic tanks, or we had a lot of debate of what on-site systems. Once that is done, excess water is coming in, they actually come to a wetland or a pond. So can we have a kind of a natural system there? We found that in Alibag there were 9 kind of wastewater sheds. In Alleppey we have 14, and each of these wastewater sheds have a sanitation zone also. It could be slums, it could be multi-storied buildings, it could be garment buildings. So many of them actually don't need this public money to come in there. What is really needed is this 50% marginalized settlements in every town. So this disaggregate analysis can bring in better allocations to the towns also. So whatever allocations in sanitation, and then we have to tell about sanitation, So why is sanitation so low in priority? So is it a public good? Public.
How did you connect the disaggregated data to people's problem? What was the mechanism to get them to pay attention to this data? I mean, usually, you said there's no community.
Yeah.
So why would those people pay attention to this disaggregated
Next time you should give me a presentation time. I have geocoded data of all toilets in that canal sheds, and we have all soak pits are all red and septic tanks are all green.
It should be the other way around, sir, but that's fine.
Yeah. So, and then, I get it. So, and then we actually show it in this kind of Gram Sabha like board meeting where each one of them know whether, they have to, because we are believers of septic tank because in the way, we thought, that is the kind of best OSS kind of facility because it's a high water table area and, very sandy beach kind of a place. And we thought good septic tanks and a good FSTP is our dream. But then I was presenting in Bangalore and then DRDO became very kind of offended by that. And then I asked many people, so there is no kind of a consensus. So before the next moon mission of ISRO, we should have a good septic tank kind of invented by some of the environmental engineering department. Let us all come together, So how many IITs, how many environmental engineering departments, If we can go to Mars and Moon and all, we should have a better septic tank, Still the solar cell is 18% and, so these are our research needed, Otherwise all research have to come from there and, sorry.
No, I'm not sure if you all understood the model that the professor is trying to explain. Local students collecting disaggregated data and connecting the community's problems using the data to change the mindset of the local community and hence channeling funds in the appropriate order of priority as per need, as per vulnerability and that sort of stuff leads to very low cost and very efficient solutions in terms of the intervention. So that's the sort of thing he's trying to present. In that, he has brought in concepts like wastewater sheds and sanitation zones and things like that, which are concepts in themselves. So there's a lot of density in what he's talked about. I would encourage you to actually connect with him and work through this process offline. Yeah, please.
One of the major things is this regulatory bottleneck where these alternate technologies, are not kind of listed or known. So we had a lot of problem actually kind of sanctioning this technology, So when BOD 600 is in the canal, now when CDD comes and this does it with 40, they say no, we have to be 10. So this tyranny of standards is a major kind of a thing, So can our network kind of argue for incremental kind of standards is one question. And the second question is, how do we kind of, into the environmental engineering curriculum, we kind of bring in these technologies, not only the technologies, the whole way of actually doing that and the importance
That's
of
a
this.
huge gap, actually.
Yeah, I think, if these two things are done, then 20 years after these regulators will be knowing. Otherwise, our engineers' mindsets are completely, So I think engineering as a discipline now is the major kind of a constraint that we see. The people inside the line departments, they are the most conservative. So I think that's also part of this whole exercise is that,
Sure. So we'll go to questions, if any, from... Sir, you had something?
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on the two views that are being presented.
Very interesting.
So it's very, very interesting in that sense. And I, as a practitioner, I tend to agree with Brother Mr. Mohapatra.
With you.
I used to run a utility company where we have 8,000 STPs, 18,000 kilometers of sewer, and 100,000 pieces of equipment. And we don't know where the sewers are. We don't know what equipments are there. And we have to come up with an asset management plan. And in the meantime, we have to do many, many things, So one of the things I adopted was what is the need of the data? What data do you really need? And what is the cost of acquiring that data? And then we make a call. Yes, this is data that we need to, and then what is the accuracy what's the confidence level of the data that you need? So there will be different gradations of, so we used traffic light, green, yellow, and red. So if it is something that is, the confidence level of the data is really good, it's a green data. And then on the demand side, if I'm going to do a new construction investment of millions, I must have good data. But if I'm just doing a planning level assessment, guesswork is fine, you know, so ballpark. So I used to adopt that kind of thing. But having said that, it's really nice to have data if you can get it like what you're doing it. And this is social data you're talking about, you know. I think that also has its thing. So the answer actually lies somewhere in between, I think, you know. It's somewhere in between. But a lot of times, decision is better than no decision. So if you are waiting for data to make the decision, I think that's not good. So if I look back at my 40 years of work, there are many, many decisions which are made on dodgy data, you know. And then 5 years down the line, we realize that, you know, and you go back and work around. That's how things move, you know. I couldn't have waited 5 years without a decision. You know, a wrong decision is fine, but 5 years down the line, I correct it. But a lot of people, they wait for complete data. This is a, sorry to say, I'm also an IITian, by the way. The field changed me. All right, anyway, so a lot of times the academic, the student mindset has not changed. So they want a problem with all the values given. But when you're out in the field, the first part of the solution is finding the problem, you know, and defining the problem. Then you solve it. Sorry, I won't talk too much.
Yeah, please. But let me ask another question in addition to that.
No, I think
and then,
the basic thing is that there is no conflict between us.
No, absolutely not. No, we are not.
One. No. First, Mr. Madhivardhan is my hero.
Yeah.
He has presented 3 weeks back in Orissa. So we also want Alapi to have such good systems in FSTP. We don't have any kind of doubt about that, you know. But this is three other things: grey water, this black water, and also solid waste. And then second, I think, you know, there is no, we are not waiting for data for FSTP to come or anything. We are just getting the energy levels there so that, you know, many people actually talk, let's talk shit. Very sorry to tell, you know. So I think in 93% of our wells had E. coli. Because it's a very dense town and we use this H2S vial, you know. 750 wells, these students went and, you know, got the, you know, water out of that, put in the vial, and 2 days later they went to the houses and they showed them how this water is black. So 93% of the open wells, 87% of the shallow tube wells, and 43% of the Kerala Water Authority water, because the tubes pass through the canals. So I think, you know, that process is anyway needed. Otherwise, a Babu-centered process, I'm sorry, is the problem here. Next 20 years, I think this is all get to transparent, and a big systems, you know, sewerage systems, we need global expertise. So but we shouldn't wait for that also to happen.
I think, you know, definitely the approach is innovative in the sense, you know, in a resource constrained environment, this approach is probably the best way to change mindsets and then bring in the resources, because the resources can be pooled then. Once mindsets are changed, resources can be locally generated. The question is, Mohapatra sir is able to do 8 FSTPs and 50 towns in 1 year. How scalable is this approach? And the second, it's a question. We need to answer the question. I mean, you know, no, we're not doing either of. We are saying in a situation which is emergency, right? Pretty much like we need to do this. Otherwise, we are, like I said, in deep shit anyway.
Who are you asking the questions?
No. For the best. You and I work together on this. You know that. So, you know, there's no conflict on that. My thing is.
That is also, you know, because that's not appropriate. Because otherwise, it's posed like that. You know. This is a complementary thing.
No, there needs to be some entertainment here also. That's why it's posed that way. Don't take it that way. The question is that there are two approaches. These are not mutually exclusive approaches. I agree with that. Actually, they can be overlapped. Even Prashant sir's work this work can go and actually even now add value there. I have no doubt about that. The question that I'm trying to explore is, soft costs of doing a project are actually grossly underestimated, even in that approach or whichever approach, right? And in many cases, there is an 8 to 10% cost of producing a DPR that is baked into a project. When we take this approach, are we more efficient? Because if we are, then it's a great thing we should replicate. Right? How do we replicate? How do we institutionalize this method? Since you have thought this much, I thought maybe you can help us with that also.
I think it's a very good question in the sense, how do we measure efficiency? Is one question, So, is it the kind of technical viability? I think when policy is telling we talk about transparency, accountability, participation, those kinds of things are also kind of have to be very efficient, and then being equitable in a town, So I think that's also kind of being sustainable. I'm not telling about FSTP, but if you go to a kind of, STP, for example, what is the kind of energy cost and the kind of, in Trivandrum, that's only big STP in 107 MLD STP. We have only 33% coverage. It came as a big JNNURM JICA project, So if this exercise was done earlier, we could have actually saved 70% of the capital cost and made it into more kind of sequential systems when the sewerage. And then what I found was that it's very difficult for a sewerage network to be extended in our cities. I've studied Kandy, I've studied Ganga Basin, I've studied Kerala, many cities. Professor Tare and I worked in Ganga Basin together. I was coordinating the policy group. We had looked at 11,000 MLD is the class 1 and 2. Every day, MLD water coming out of class 1 and 2. 57,000 crore was the capital cost in 2011 when we calculated. So the point is that, there could not be one size fits all. So that's why what we do is a kind of, situation analysis. That can be even used for making an STP, no doubt about it. This data can be used for making an STP, but then who decides that is the question. Can a larger group, because in NUSP, that was a trigger point also. National Urban Sanitation Policy had city sanitation plans to be made. And then it is given to consultants who doesn't have, any idea. They come from all over, did a very bad job. We have done an analysis of the CSPs also in India. So this was to make CSP into a kind of, good exercise also, which gives us a, where is do we need an STP? How much on-site systems are we good? How is the FSCP to be planned? I think this is the starting point of a town level discussion.
Wonderful. Any other questions? All right. I think I've taken it long enough that you're all tired, but you have to pardon me for my excitement. So I get very excited with these sort of things because I worked with Prashant sir, I worked with NC sir, and at the time when they came, both of those problems were looking very intractable. Right? In Odisha, we were like discussing forever late into the night saying, how do we do this for such a big FSTP? We had not even imagined at that time how big these things were, right? And with NC sir, when he first came, it was like, what is he even talking about? I don't even understand what he's talking about. So it took a lot of education to get here, and today we're enjoying whatever has come out of that, and that's why the excitement. So I beg your pardon for stretching this very long. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panelists.
Yeah. So, decoding the sanitation mechanics. Hope we decoded some mechanics today. So, thanks for all the participants, and thanks to Shashanka sir for taking the moderator position in a very short notice. I also like to thank my team, Neha, who's also an IITian. Yeah, and Tanvi and Abhinav. Thanks for all your participation. Yeah, thank you.